On today's podcast, we sit down and talk with music marketing expert Brian Popowitz from Black Box. They are a leading music marketing company. We talked all about the current state of music marketing in today's landscape, what the most important elements are in marketing, how do you define an album cycle, are albums even relevant today, what are the components that people look for in terms of establishing a connection with an audience, and so much more. You're not going to want to miss it. This is really, really great stuff if you're putting out an album today. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sit down and talk with music marketing expert Brian Popowitz from Black Box, a leading music marketing company, about the current state of the music market today, what are the most important elements in marketing music in today's crowded landscape, and do they differ depending on genre? How long should an album cycle be? The concept of the fan economy, and much more. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured interview is with Brian Popowitz. Brian is the GM of Black Box Marketing, which is one of the leading music marketing companies in the business. It was a really interesting conversation. Brian got into a lot of great concepts in our discussion, talking about things like what are the most important factors of marketing music today? What connects with an audience today from a marketing standpoint that was different from the past? The personal narrative of an artist. What is that, and how to bring that out in your music? And a concept that I thought was really, really interesting because I'd never heard about it before, which is the concept of personalization marketing in music today. And with social media and with the ability to break things down, this is something that is becoming more and more common in connecting with an audience.
Absolutely. And I thought some of the other points that were really great in the interview that we touched on were the important elements in the new music economy and the relevancy in album cycles today. Is there even any relevancy in that? And the new music business models that are emerging today. So I thought this was a really, really great interview with a really unique company in a really unique space.
Absolutely. I thought, just to riff on the point you were making about, do you even need to make albums anymore? And if you do, at what point in your career do you need to be doing them? And he talks about a lot about that, which is really interesting.
Absolutely. So Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured interview with Brian Popowitz.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I always like to start the interviews with the same question that I ask of everybody, and that is, do you remember when in your life that you knew the music business was going to be your professional career path?
I do.
Okay, great.
I do in a very distinct way, and I think that is unique to me. For no reason other than I guess I was lucky and disillusioned, and I just by nature of who I am became incredibly goal oriented. So I'll give you kind of the quick, hopefully truncated version of it. But when you're a kid, maybe it was elementary school or something, and the teacher asked, what would you guys like to be when you grow up? And Timmy to the right says, I want to be a fireman. And Johnny to the left says, I want to be a football player. I said, I wanted to be Clive Davis, or I wanted to be, Leor Cohen or one of those guys. And I very, very distinctly knew that I wanted to be in the music business. And further to that was, romanticized by the idea of the record label guy, that figure of power who was behind the scenes. And, I'm not exactly sure what exposure I had to even come up with that idea. I certainly had no interest in being on the other side and being in a band or anything like that. And I had no idea what those guys did every day, but I was very interested in it. I kind of maintained that interest and refined it over my career to get me to where I am. But I'm a very unique case in that I knew what I wanted to do. I recognized where I wanted to go and tried to architect the path to get there. Whereas many people, as they're trying to figure out their professional development and route, simply don't have that clarity. And for me, it was there, day one before anything.
Interesting, because I always felt very grateful. I started my career at 20 years old as an intern, and I always felt very grateful that I had that kind of focus, because so many of my friends, as you said, they didn't have the clarity of what they wanted to do, and I always felt very grateful that I did have that clarity and that I was able to, make my living very, very early on in my life. So I totally understand what you're saying.
I think I've just had a series of good guidance and luck. But very early in my career, I think I was told by people, time and experience will reward you. Your relationships will reward you. And if you have that understanding at an early age, you can start to accrue those relationships and experience early. And so, for me, an entry point was DJing locally in my neighborhood for parties, and using that as a basis to understand how music made people feel emotionally. It also allowed me to be an entrepreneur and to figure out how I can sustain and run a business and communicate to a client. And from there, I was able to parlay, that experience to the next thing and the next thing. And as you said, internships and jobs and all of it pursues. But if you kind of have that understanding that you need to invest in yourself and you need to take every relationship and use it to further your career, it's quite interesting how fast you can develop.
Absolutely. Now, Brian, when you started your career in digital marketing, how were records, and artists music marketed then?
Sure. So I guess, I came into the business probably in the dawn of a terrible time. The party was over, and illegal piracy was a means of great accessibility to music, which was really bad for the recorded music business, and also really great for fans and technology. And clearly, in hindsight, there was a lot of missteps made, but nonetheless, a bad economic time for the music industry. So I came into the business, I think, early 2000s in a formal way, where I started learning digital marketing, and this was at the time where MySpace was coming into its own, and the accessibility of music and the means of discovery started to present itself digitally, probably for the first time in a meaningful way. And I very distinctly remember a clear entry point for me was becoming a kind of college rep or a street team rep for a small indie record label called Drive-Thru Records that was based in LA. And through that, I started to learn about how I can take the interest of an artist and perpetuate it to a prospective audience that was very digitally focused. That was an interesting time for the business. There was so much to learn, and I think in tough times you probably learn the most. And I didn't get to see those high times where people were selling millions and millions of albums. I saw a really tough time, and through it, we all had to problem solve and learn how to navigate ourselves out of a changing digital landscape. And I think that's really helped me kind of understand the business and have some humility through it, to recognize that it's also really, really hard.
Yeah, it is hard, and it's been an enormous. I'm fond of saying that the music industry has been going through a revolution, a very slow one for the last 16, 17 years, and it's been, there's been different phases of that revolution, as you just articulated, with not only a change in technology, that's one aspect, but one of the things that I think, that very seldom ever gets talked about, but that I know you innately will understand, is that, with revolutions, not only come, a drastic upheaval of the established order, but with revolutions, what isn't spoken about a lot is that they come with an entirely new value set. And that is what I have seen in my own experience, having come from the old model. I've been in it for 41 years, is that the values around music, the values around what is most important today among digital natives is profoundly different than the model was, back in the day, like when you said people would sell millions and millions of albums. It was a whole different kind of value system as it relates to music, as it relates to artists. And I know, based on your work, you innately get that concept.
Sure. And, I think that's an interesting statement to make, because I think that in some ways, the fundamentals of music and its connection to people are classic and haven't changed. Music is this unique medium that makes people feel something in a way that we can't really compare it to almost anything else. And the relationship that an artist can have with the listener is something incredibly special. And that hasn't changed, or it hasn't changed in the mechanics of it. It's changed in the way that it's been delivered and the way it's been monetized. Mm-hmm. And so I think that part of the value structure is there. Now, the business of it has changed completely. If you just strip it down to the economics and go to the basics of this, you would record music. You would manufacture it, you would market it, you would distribute it, people would buy it, and it would play in this really friendly ecosystem that was incredibly healthy and lucrative for the music business for so many years until it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And that's when technology disrupted it all. And as we've come out of that, I think that we've been forced to really understand what should we be monetizing. And it's not to say that music is a commodity, but music has a value in the digital economy that to be honest, doesn't get artists and labels rich in the way that they used to,
right.
Or it doesn't breed what it used to. So, I'll probably get into it later in conversation, but, a good example of how the economics kind of played with the value of the relationship with artists and fans was, in a major label system where you're predicated where your economics are predicated on singles. You don't always see the long-term career of an artist, pursue as a result of that single focus. And that is a disruptive kind of value exchange that the business of selling music has put in place of a changing way that we consume. But I think through it all and where we are today, it's incredible. It's fragmented. The revenue streams are all over the place. It's the sum of the parts, the pennies. It's the question of, well, who's in charge of really creating value out of music and exploiting it, and how do we do that? Through merch, through touring, through social monetization, through selling music, through syncs, and through it all, I think it's great. I think it's empowered fans. I think it's empowered artists, and that relationship allows for a really healthy way of fans and artists to be successful in many different ways, which I don't think was ever present in a past music business, where you would release an album if you were so lucky, you would have a big success, you would tour it, and you would do it again if you could in 2 or 3 years. And today it's not like that, and I think that's for the better.
I agree with you, and I don't think the relationship with artist and audience was the same back then. I mean, the way you just put it was perfect. You would do an album every 2 or 3 years. You'd say, hey, Brian, here's my new album. I'll see you in 2 or 3 years. And that,
sure.
And that was the extent. And and we'll get into this, that, that relationship now is profoundly and radically different. I want to touch on something else, Brian, is that, today you're GM at an independent music marketing company called Black Box. And Black Box is a company doesn't really fit the conventional music business ecosystem. How did the company get formed, number one, and what exactly does it provide?
Sure. Well, you're right. It's not part of the conventional ecosystem, and that's been among the biggest challenges. But luckily, investing 5 years of time, communicating it, it's starting to connect, and being a little bit ahead and seeing the writing on the wall is starting to pay off. But Black Box was really born out of a vision by Livia Tortella. Livia was most recently the co-president of Warner Brothers Records, where her and I worked together for the first time. And just a small anecdote on her, Livia is a hardworking, badass female executive that worked at record labels for her entire career, rising the ranks, and putting incredible results on the board, touching the careers of many hugely successful commercial artists that many people have heard of. And I think if I am to kind of speak for her, her motivation had always been to help an artist see the success they want to see. And I think that as she realized in her growth and in her position of power over the years in the conventional record label system, the higher she got, the harder it was to impact the career of an artist. And in seeing the disruption of streaming, a few years out, she said there's got to be an honest way for marketing to support the brand and identity of an artist and their unique qualification of success. And so we had to think about, well, how would you do that? What would that look like? Is that a record label, a management company, or something completely different? And the net result of that is Black Box, an independent marketing agency that basically gets paid as an agency model versus a back end, so that we are honestly incentivized to support the vision of an artist. And really, it was this void of artist development, something that was incredibly important to the old kind of structure of the music business, but in the rapidly changing version of the music business, kind of fell by the wayside. And so, in one aspect, we're trying to understand, who does that job? Who's responsible for developing artists? And further to that, how can an artist have a career that they qualify as successful versus the more one-dimensional approach of success that is starting to be bred through a major label hit? And Black Box was kind of born to address those things. I think maybe to oversimplify it, Black Box is simply designed to be a haven for artists to come in a very democratized way and seek expertise and support in marketing, regardless of their situation, whether they're the number one label priority at Universal or an unsigned artist that has incredible music and is trying to build a team around them to do something unique.
Yeah, well, precisely. And what's interesting in listening to you, Brian, is that in the past, and you touched on this, marketing music and music artists specifically was more oriented toward the music exclusively. I mean, you pointed out like the album, the single, the orientation toward radio, retail. Today, it seems that an artist's story, an artist's personal narrative, or, the context, if you will, is absolutely crucial to connecting with an audience. And in your mind, I mean, you touched on this at the beginning, and I'm curious if you could expand. What brought this change about? Was it just technology? Was it a change in the culture? I mean, you were part of that whole transition. What's your sense on what brought about the change in those kinds of values?
Well, I mean, Richard, you're exactly right. And to be honest, I don't know that it's been a change as much as it's just been a slow moving train that has existed for a very long time. I would credit my entry point professionally in the music industry to Drive Through Records, a indie label that was purely built on the artist to fan relationship in a very unique way. And so I believe that the brand of an artist has always been a very, very important part of the equation. But with technology, I think that we've been able to see parts of an artist and their influence on culture that has created a new level of attraction, such to say that, I think we're in an era where the music is the byproduct of the asset, and the asset truly is the artist. The artist stands for something. They represent culture. They represent fashion. They represent a point of view that is so unique and powerful that in the fast pace of singles and albums and things coming in and out, the staying power of a unique narrative for an artist is the thing that pays long-term dividends and builds that affinity between the artist and the fan.
Absolutely.
And there's been, no time like now where through social media and other means of accessibility to artists and our constant flow of content and whatever it might be, there is an incredible opportunity for a music listener to become a fan. And that's something really special right now.
Brian, who are some of the clients that Black Box is working with currently?
Well, we have a revolving roster of clients, and to talk about it in generalities, I would say that probably 70% of our clients are developing artists, and maybe 30% are established artists. We've worked across every major label, many independent labels, almost all of the major independent distribution services. And there's been a few occasions where a great artist has walked out of, off the street into our office and we said, we love your vision. We love your music. We've touched it all. And I think it's been incredibly interesting to see how people engage us or why they engage us. There's a crop of artists that have been signed to majors for many, many years. And now their deal is up and they say, well, what would happen if I continue to release music? I fully outright own my assets and I just hire a team to power my back end. And there are many occasions where, artists that have their own audience, that have been around for a while, that want to release music and do it the right way, but reap the financial benefits, would be better suited hiring a third-party company than having another label agreement. There are other instances where, there's an artist and a manager and they have a vision and they've scrapped together a few bucks, or they took some outside investment and they've hired us to try to get from point A to point B. We've had clients that are record labels that use us in a very unique way across roster. We try to be as flexible as possible with this kind of commonality in our clients, and that is they have to be dedicated and hardworking with music that has some viability to it. And our promise to them is that we will put our head down and outwork anyone else in the business to help realize their vision. And through that, we're genre agnostic. We'll take on anyone. And we have a small office in Nashville that deals with country and CCM, and of course our office in LA that touches all genres, and we've worked artists in different countries. And it's really shown that the principles of marketing, the focus on the social narrative, the visual brand of an artist, who they are and why you should care, is kind of a universal principle that put in play in correlation to how you release music is a powerful mix of how artists can, have a career and use a team like ours that kind of circumvents the traditional structure of maybe a record label.
On that, Brian, I'm wondering, what would you say, and you've touched on some of them in this conversation, but I was wondering if you could expand more. What are some of the most important elements in the new music economy today is part one, and part two of that is, do those elements vary from genre to genre?
Yeah, I would say if we're to generalize, there's kind of a linear process to it that we see. First and foremost, regardless of genre, is the brand and identity of an artist. And for us, just to talk a little bit about the process, before we go in and we say, here's what we think we can do, we have to truly know who an artist is, because it's our responsibility to honestly market that. And so regardless of huge superstar that everybody knows or small up and coming rapper, we need to know your brand and identity, and we need to listen to your story, not just your music story, but what your family life is like, and what your hobbies are, and who your friends are, and your struggles and your successes. And our responsibility is then to take the themes and commonalities of an artist and what makes them uniquely them, and put it into a way that translates across every touch point and digital vertical that they have to connect with an audience. And further to that, it gets nuanced into how they represent that with their tone and their diction on social media, their visual content, who they collaborate with in various music projects, etc. And so I think that foremost is an incredible importance and emphasis in the new music economy and how an artist can rise up. From there, I think that a very well thought out project management approach is critical. If we're thinking about an always on strategy today, where artists have to be ever present, is it sustainable to release a song every week or every month or every year? Do we need an album here or there? When should we tour? And it might sound kind of fundamental, but project management has been a dying art that has been turned over to the magic bullet, which might be a radio single that could go or doesn't go, or a song that might explode on Spotify or doesn't, or a viral moment that is happening and then everyone's trying to capitalize on it. To us, this incredible combination of knowing who you are and how to represent it across every digital touch point, and then having a real strategy and plan of how you do that, not just today or tomorrow, but for the next year, 18 months, 2 years, 5 years, all of a sudden you have a roadmap to follow. And I think that's a very different philosophy from kind of conventional thought of campaigns. And okay, you went into the studio, you recorded the album. How are we putting these songs out? It's so much deeper than that. And I think that's maybe one of the stark changes that we as a company try to embody and reflect in our work.
Brian, today, from a marketing standpoint, is the album cycle of an artist a concept that's no longer relevant in today's saturated landscape?
For the most part, I would say yes. I mean, it's hard to say affirm generalities, and certainly there are older, more established artists that can come and go, and sometimes scarcity is a value, and so an artist can drop a bomb of being present and not oversaturate and go away and play with the interest of a fan and the desires of fans. But I would say for the large part of the the emerging artist, the album campaign cycle is an antiquated idea. And the hardest thing that we say often in our office is restarting the engine. When the car is moving, you can't turn it off, or else you're kind of just treading water in the same place. So we recognize that for many artists, not only is it unsustainable, but it's probably not a good idea to just perpetually release music. That said, what are we doing in between that? Does the artist have a social initiative that is dear to their heart, that can be part of their narrative, that allows them to stay in touch with their fans? Are they touring in between? Are they doing other projects? Are they just using the mediums that we have in front of us, like YouTube, to kind of vlog their life of what it's like to not be touring and not release music? So for us, a cycle is 365 days a year, and it keeps repeating. And it really takes a well thought out approach for every day, every week, every month to continuously grow and engage your audience. And if you have fans, you have a business. And so for us, it's very important to not lose that. And it's never been more clear than what we can see today by measuring our analytics and seeing the drop off and the gains. So I would say that for some artists, they could still get away with the campaign oriented approach. For other artists, or for the large majority of developing artists, it just isn't the case. The only thing I would say is that we are recognizing a moment where certain artists start to pop and they can hit a point of oversaturation. And I think, an educated manager is the best position to try to navigate that. And there's no rules around it. And it's very hard to do, but we do see, that tipping point where an artist is overexposed, and their authenticity is compromised by their visibility in a way that becomes unattractive. But very few artists get to that point, and it tends to be a good problem to have.
Yeah. What's interesting about hearing you say that is that I remember in previous eras, that was a problem. And you saw careers that should have lasted 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years be reduced to a career that lasted 2 years because they insisted on running it at 200 miles an hour.
Sure.
And they achieved their diamond album, but the artist was exhausted, the public was exhausted, and the career was over. And then, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, like, what were some of the examples of people that didn't do that when the temptation was so great to do it? One of the last people I remember who didn't do that. Do you remember when Norah Jones debuted?
Sure.
That's a perfect example of someone who didn't say yes to every single offer that came to her and did not run her career into the toilet in an 18-month period, which she very, very well could have. I think Adele is another example of somebody who
Sure.
didn't say yes to every single, financial opportunity that came to her because it just wasn't the right thing. And the point you're making, I think, is a very, very important one, because I think there's a lot of careers out there, and we don't have to name names, but a lot of careers out there that could be much longer careers, much more viable careers, if they had learned to balance, let's, be fair about it, maybe it's not a yes or no, but balance the elements that you're speaking of in a way that was more
Sure.
conducive toward building the career, I think.
Well, I think the balance and momentum is a completely undervalued art when it comes to navigating an artist's career. And I'll try to speak in some level of candidness, but also respect some level of privacy and confidentiality. But
Right.
I would say that in various experiences when I have worked at a major label, I've seen the kind of expedited approach of making an artist a star. And the reality to that in many instances is that a song goes to radio and the artist is at this kind of vulnerable space. They're the new kid on the block and they have a hot song. But do they have everything else? Have they learned how to do media training? Have they learned how to tour and convert fans? Do they have that base of diehard fans that know everything about them and will show up at odd hours to do anything that's needed? And oftentimes what will happen is, the song will stall at radio and there's nothing to fall back on. Or in some instances, a song will explode at radio and all of a sudden there's, a fleeting moment of affinity around a song, which sometimes translates to the affinity of an artist, but not enough is built. And if the second song doesn't do the same thing and it caps out too early, there's nothing to fall back on. So, it's so tempting because so many artists see the stories of a TikTok success and something happening incredibly fast, and want that and want success in their career. The most common request we'll get for prospective clients is, hey, can you get me on New Music Friday? And it's incredibly short-sighted because it's this perception that we can move fast. If someone just heard my music and I got a lot of fans, I will have a career. It just simply isn't the case. And so a lot of times what we're doing as we're coaching our artists and clients is helping them pump the brakes, saying, let's not waste money at radio right now. Let's get to 100,000 fans who know every word to your song. That is powerful. I know how to exploit that. I know how to monetize that. I know how to get that sustained for the next 5 to 10 years. How does that sound? And it might not be the sexiest plan, but it is the plan that's more bulletproof for the long term. And I think anything less than that often becomes a huge disservice to these artists that have no plan B and may see what it looks like and want it right now. But if they go for it right now, they compromise everything, and that risk isn't something that I'm often comfortable taking with them.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured interview. Stay tuned because we've got so much more value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Ritch, you're the founder, CEO, legend of Music Business Registry. Tell us what the Music Business Registry is all about.
Well, what it's about, Eric, is it's a company that is designed to provide the most accurate and up-to-date contact information for the music business. So if someone is looking to reach the A&R community, if someone is looking to reach music publishers, if someone needs to reach artist managers, if someone needs to reach music attorneys, if someone's looking to place their music into film and television and needs to reach all the music supervisors, that's the contact information that we provide. We've been doing it for 28 years. We're sort of the industry standard, if you will, for the music business, and have been serving them since 1992. So that's what we do.
Amazing. So if I wanted to find out let's say, A&R people from Warner Brothers, let's say, I can just go in there and find that in the A&R registry?
Absolutely. You'll find all of the Warner Brothers in there. You'll find the Warner Brothers in LA, Warner Brothers in New York, Warner Brothers in Nashville, Warner Brothers in London, Warner Brothers, probably in Australia as well. So those are the main territories that we cover.
Amazing. And we're offering all of our insiders right now that are listening, if you visit musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount off your first order. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. Anything else you want to say, Ritch?
Well, when you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com. Let me ask you, Brian, then, on that, what are some of the things that make an artist connect or popular today versus 5-10 years ago in your experience?
Sure.
And what I mean by that is not necessarily technology or, it's just social media, but are there specific kinds of, ephemeral things or things that are new to the culture today that you're seeing being on the front lines of marketing?
I mean, it's hard to answer the question without thinking about the contribution of technology, but I would take a step back and say that authenticity and creativity are those things. Now, it's not to say that those attributes were not a part of what made the artist-fan relationship strong in prior times. But today, it's so open for it. The use of Twitter and Instagram and other platforms allow artists to have this relatively clear path to communicate with their fans, and there's an expectation that they will give them something that's deep, that's substantive, and so there are certain artists that we see that have a facade and their life seems great, and there's no substance to it. Then there are the other artists that will give you something honest and raw and real and sometimes unpleasant. And the authenticity angle of being an artist today, I think, is grossly different than what it was. I mean, I remember, being in meetings and taking an artist and looking at it in some ways like a product. And so, to connect with a particular demographic, that artist should look like this. Let's pretend that this artist doesn't have a girlfriend. Let's age this person down and let's create the superstar that we're supposed to see. And I would say that authenticity today has never been more important. With respect to creativity, that's always been, part of the ingredients that makes an artist successful, and it's most often, reflected in the music they deliver. Creativity now has such a broad application that creative artists are winning. Whether that's an artist that's quick-witted on Twitter that can respond to topical conversations, to artists that have incredible experiences for their fans. Spotify does a really cool thing called Fans First, where an artist will curate an experience for super fans based on listening behavior. And certain artists have, picked choice fans to do laser tag with them or other things that previously haven't been done. So I would say those two things are incredibly important in what makes an artist successful today. But again, technology is a vital part of that. And the two have to coexist for artists to be able to bring that authenticity and creativity to a mass audience.
Let me ask you, Brian, in today's music ecosystem, do record labels have a lot of limitations and boundaries?
Well, I think that, record labels have always had bureaucracy and red tape, but for us at Black Box, we think there's a great future for major labels and indie labels too. Clearly there's a market share thing, and there's access to capital and oftentimes access to really smart resources, which makes record labels incredibly valuable to artists. And so I think that there's a great future for labels. Now, of course, labels have been built in the kind of pre-streaming era, and so their nimbleness and their ability to adapt and change is often challenged by the foundation that has always been those labels. But that said, I don't think that they're limited. They just need to be able to evolve. They certainly will always have a place, but better yet, artists now have choices. So whether it's a major label, an indie, or being unsigned, anyone can go to DistroKid and release a song. And further to that, you can really bootstrap a team, whether it's DistroKid plus a publicist plus a radio indie or a black box type of partner. There's so many ways to be successful as an artist. And so I think the diversification of how you become successful is no longer solely dominated by an artist and the relationship with their record label, but record labels are clearly an important part of that ecosystem, and there is great advantages of them for particular artists, and I would say most so for artists that need top 40 radio as part of their strategy.
Interesting, Brian. As you were speaking, I wanted it reminded me of something that I read about Black Box, and I wanted to ask you about, and that is that Black Box has partnerships, I think, with two companies that I think are very interesting. One is FanJoy and one is FanPage, and two companies that seem to be completely immersed in the new artist fan economy. And I was wondering if you could tell us about that.
Sure. Those are some of our earlier relationships, and we've broadened our partnerships beyond those two to a partnership with The Orchard and a handful of others. And I think, being an independent company, which is very much by design for us, so that we're, not beholden to both shareholders, but also restricted by who we can affiliate ourselves with. As Black Box, we recognize that the landscape will change all the time. The partnerships and relationships that we're going to need are going to change all the time. And being flexible to being independent and bridging partnerships with various companies, over time is going to be advantageous to our artists. The FanJoy one, if I can speak to it, in kind of the earlier days of Black Box, was very, very cool in that it was a way for the experience of an artist and a fan to be monetized that had no emphasis on the music. So to be a little bit more specific, what we would do is we would create subscription boxes where artists would curate various products and things that they loved, and fans would sign up to receive those boxes every month or every quarter, I believe. And the amazing thing there is it just shows that if you can create an audience that cares about an artist versus listeners who just hear a song when it's big, you can have a sustainable business. So much so that you don't even have to release music, as long as you can engage your audience and provide ways that you can monetize them and never compromise the relationship and never make any of that, never make the fan feel as if you're exploiting them. There's a 365-day-a-year business to be had. And so FanJoy, as a technology partner, helped power that for some of our artists that chose to use that. And beyond FanJoy, there's been a number of amazing kind of modern companies that have popped up that we've done certain things with, recognizing that we're really good at marketing and strategy. But our ability to also recognize what we're not great at and what we can tap into outside of our in-house expertise is a great realization that we always put in play when it comes to partnering with other companies.
Absolutely. And I would think an essential element of your continued success.
Yeah, it has to be. For us being independent, we have to be nimble, we have to be small, we have to be smarter and efficient and so forth. And when you bring in large overheads and operations, those are huge risks. And for us, we know what we're really good at. We also know that there's other amazing companies out there that are great at other things that can be complements to what we're doing. And our interest is in providing the artists what they need. Those needs evolve all the time and are very circumstantial to each artist based on their genre, how big they are, what their goals are. And it's our opportunity to help fill the gaps where needed so that we can create a really great end-to-end experience where artists have the strategy and means of execution to see through that vision in whatever it looks like.
We once heard you say in an interview that at Black Box, we always say, no two fans are the same. I take this to mean the idea of personalization and dynamic marketing is becoming extremely important in developing a strong relationship between the artist and audience.
It's so important, and it's one of the benefits of technology. One fan may be a passive listener, and another fan may know the artist's birthday, their social security number, their sister's name, and so much more. And so the relationship that an artist should have with artists, knowing the varying degrees of affinity, is different. And as a marketer, I have to think about that. And so when I'm advertising to one segment of fans that let's call more passive, the opportunity might be to get them to listen to a few more songs. Whereas the super fans may want to be targeted with a $1,000 experience of going on a cruise ship with an artist. And it's part of the kind of dynamic marketing that will come to fruition over the years that I think will help, again, strengthen the artist to fan relationship and create a very healthy business where the artists feel like they're appropriately communicated to and served by the fans and vice versa.
Today, Brian, what new business models do you see emerging or have emerged that can help new artists create a context around their music? Are there any that you're working with at Black Box or that you see emerging, or any that excite you in particular?
Well, I think that the onus to create a context around your music is something that the artist and the manager really have to think about, and whatever partners they bring in. I think it's been interesting to see so many artists think about their team as, their content creator, their video guy, whatever their crew is, and the opportunity for that small group of people to create context around the music and the lifestyle is real. With respect to, well, what do you do with that? There's so many, business models to take. So you think about Chance the Rapper, a guy who just said, I'm going to create frictionless accessibility to my music and never charge anyone for it. And through that, amass a huge audience and could monetize that not by the sale of his music, but by the brand of Chance the Rapper. So now you see him in commercials, and of course he's gone on to do incredible things, and through streaming, I'm sure is pretty comfortable. So I think that if you, again, it kind of goes back to this idea. If you have an audience, there are many different ways that you can monetize it. Again, there's a huge degree of options now for artists with respect to their deals. So you could pay an annual subscription to use, a self-service distribution model. You could, do a very modest rev share deal with an independent distributor. You can sign with the label. But artists have choices now, and it allows them to be, I think, back in the driver's seat when it comes to navigating their career and their future. I think if they can own their creative experience and ideate around the context by which people listen and consume and experience their music, and then use the technologies and businesses that surround them to ensure that the distribution is there for people to be able to access that content, then they have a chance at building a career that's built and powered by fans.
Would you agree that today a new artist needs a distinct strategy when planning the launch of their music?
Absolutely. I mean, there's just too many artists that think that their strategy is getting on a big Spotify playlist or going to radio. I think the statistic is 20,000 songs a day get uploaded to the various streaming services. So, like we say at Black Box, if you don't know where you're going, how do you get there? And sometimes that's just a recognition of the type of artist you want to be. At the end of the day, if you want to have some sort of political impact on the world, or if you just want to make a ton of money, or you want to have a long-term touring career, that realization and understanding has to be present. And then the question is, well, how do you get there? What shouldn't you do versus what should you do? And we find it quite foolish for any artist that thinks that their music in itself will just stand out. And of course, we're seeing moments of virality sway the perception of how quick and fast music, moves. And it creates this idea for kind of vulnerable artists that maybe that will happen. My music's that good that it will just kind of take off. I'll become this TikTok success. And unfortunately, for most artists, that just isn't the case. So for us, it doesn't have to be a highfalutin strategy with a lot of experts, and you don't have to spend a ton of money. You just have to be creative, and you have to know where you're going and how to get there. And further to that, the streaming services, when you're asking them to support your music, are pushing back and saying, okay, well, we're not your marketing plan. Show us what your marketing plan is. Where is the social messaging? What kind of content are you releasing? How are you engaging with your fans? Are you chatting with them? Are you dropping a new merch line? Do you have any syncs? Are you touring? What kind of advertising campaign do you have to support the music? And it takes all of those touch points for the music to ultimately connect with an audience. So anything less than some sort of understanding of where you're going and a strategy to get there just puts you in a position to not see the success that you might want to see as an artist.
Interesting. I want to ask you a personal question throughout your life, which is, throughout your career, are there any specific books or films that you have found to be particularly inspiring, professionally speaking, that you would recommend, artists or business professionals should be reading or watching to educate themselves?
Oh, that's a great question. And there's just been so many, it's hard to identify one. Recently I saw Supermensch. I've been inspired by the biographies of various industry figures, and even outside of our industry, like the Steve Jobs one. And I think, for me, there's the, resource music industry books like Donald Passman's stuff. And then there's, your experiences. I think I've learned most through experience and through relationships, through engaging in conversation. I've been inspired, certainly, by a number of books and films and documentaries. But I would say for myself personally, I've innately had an interest in the music industry. And through that, have found different ways to educate myself and to immerse myself in that culture. And until you do it and you spend time with it, it's hard to really grasp it. So I can't say that there's one particular one that comes to mind, although I'll give it some thought and message you guys with anything that really stands out. But the Donald Passman's books, of course, are foundational. And, in college, my education was definitely slanted with a music industry lens. So I was able to have some level of foreground and understanding how all the parts work, but nothing supplements, the internships and the people I got to meet and talk to and ask questions, and the conferences that, I went to and ultimately participated in. Those types of things, I think, are great standouts for me, and the fodder that helped educate my mind around the music industry.
Brian, as someone who loves this stuff, there's a couple that I would love to recommend to you. One is the new Showtime documentary called Shangri-La. I don't know if you've seen that yet. It's a 4-hour documentary pretty much on the creative process of music. And its base is Rick Rubin and the Shangri-La Studios. It's unbelievable in what it captures, and the concepts around creativity are brilliant. Another one that I think you would enjoy is the documentary The House That Amit Built, which is a documentary all about the building of Atlantic Records. It's something that he did right before he died, and it's his whole life, and it's the whole history of Atlantic Records from 1947 up until his death in 2006. It's incredible. So it's really, really comprehensive. So I think you, as a student of this business, would love that. And then, of course, there's all the great biographies like The Operator by David Geffen and Clive Davis's book and Seymour Stein's book, and all of these great biographies of people that have been around in the business for a long time. But I just wanted to put those out to you because I think you would love them in particular. Let me ask you, what developments are you seeing? Because one thing I haven't asked you is, the developments that you're seeing in the influencer landscape regarding music today. Are you seeing that landscape evolve? Are you seeing new kinds of things emerge with regards to that particular segment in music culture?
Absolutely. Influencers are amazing in many ways, and they're also filthy rich for no reason in other ways. So influencers are great because they represent an audience that understands and is highly influenced by anything that they do. And that demographic that they represent is very specific. So how you can engage with an influencer could be incredibly powerful. Now, that said, I've seen the misuse of funds over and over again with this thought that if someone who has X amount of social followers posts about my music, something will happen. It's just not the case. The idea of working with an influencer is the context, and part of the conversation that we had earlier. A influencer engaging with an artist in a highly contextual way, say that influencer is in the music video, for example, gives their audience a reason to check out that content in a way that isn't abstract or some sort of implicit endorsement. It is, a very powerful medium. And as we've looked at how do we market music now that the mediums by which people discover are so fragmented and vast outside of, radio ads and television ads and print ads and billboard ads, influencers become something of great interest. But the question is, how do you work with them, and can you find the right influencers? Someone who has 1 million fans might speak to 1 million people who have no interest in your music. And so, we think about this all the time and think about how do you prod influencers to engage with music in the right way? What's the value exchange? Who's their audience? And where's the tipping point where this becomes culturally relevant? I've seen a lot of artists and campaigns spend far too much money moving the ball forward, but not to the point where it self-perpetuates itself. And then it just becomes a moment. So I think that influencers and the sector of influencers is very interesting. And further to that, it becomes a avenue for monetization with respect to artists as they build their audience. They are influencers. How do they play in this space in such a way that allows them to benefit financially, but also doesn't compromise who they are? And I think artists have been held to a higher standard in what they endorse and how they can make money through their influence. And it's been interesting to see how artists have taken that opportunity today and used it without compromising their brand and their identity. So influencers are great if used correctly.
Let me ask you, Brian, for those in our audience who are committed to having a career in music marketing, such as yourself, what advice do you have for them that you can share?
There's probably a few things. First of which is internships. For me, I was so fortunate to intern at a small indie label that gave me this very elementary foundation of understanding the various positions in a label and kind of putting together that person does this and that person does that, and that's how it all works. And that experience, as fundamental as it is incredibly important. The other thing is, again, relationships. It sounds old school and antiquated, but it's a very small business. And if you're able to get your foot in the door and make a few relationships through it, that will pay dividends time and time again. And so for me, I was able to find an internship, learn as much as I could, stand out, build relationships through it, and parlay each relationship into a professional opportunity, along the way. But it's a very hard business, but it's also a great time to be a part of it. If you don't love it, don't do it. It is not, what you might see on Entourage. It is oftentimes really challenging and really hard and not as glamorous as it might, be made out to be.
Exactly.
And you have to be persistent and passionate. It is incredibly discouraging when you work super hard and people just don't connect to the music. It feels like an absolute failure when you give it your all and then you have to tell the artist that it's not happening and they're not developing in the way that we forecast, and it's very hard. But what I would say is you get those successes and there's no better high and no better feeling. And so if you don't innately have that drive and passion, someone else will outwork you for it.
Yeah.
So working hard, getting internships and nurturing your relationships, I think are great starting tools for any young professional to have.
What about the same question, Brian, but for artists? I mean, do you have different advice for artists who are looking to have a professional music career for themselves to be artists in today's music market? Do you have any insights that you can offer?
Yeah, I think there's similar advice that they can benefit from. One of which is probably persistence. It is incredibly hard, and artists by nature of being artists, can be sensitive to, the idea of their music working or not working. My thought is, if you know who you are, keep your head down and do it until it breaks. And be critical along the way. If something isn't working, try to understand why and address it. But for artists, do as much as you can on your own to get as far as you can until people are coming to you. I've seen so many artists that, say, oh, if I just had this manager, or I really need to get signed to a label, versus labels and agents and managers hunting them down saying, we've got to work together. For artists, the thought is build your audience, get to a point of leverage, create as much noise as you can on your own before you jump into any relationship, or you'll innately know when it's time and when you need it. You just can't keep up, and that's a great problem to have. But for artists, know who you are, understand what success looks like to you, build a plan to go follow it and get it, and work harder than anyone else.
Brian, where can people best connect with you and Black Box?
So please find us at blackbox.la. That's our website. There's a contact form there. We're pretty prompt with replies there. And we're happy to answer questions and connect with everyone. I'm on social media. My handle is just Brian Popowitz, I think, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc.
Brian, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. I really, really appreciate it very, very much. We both do.
Ritch, Eric, thank you so much for having me. It's always great connecting. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care.
Great, great, great piece. I have always loved talking with Brian. He's one of the brightest, most incisive people on this subject. He's got a great background in music. He worked at Warner Brothers in marketing. He worked for the president of the label. He's now in a private company, Black Box Marketing, with her Livia Tortella. And they do this kind of thing, all day long. And just, as you heard and just listening to him, a lot of the concepts, a lot of the points are so on the money in terms of marketing music, especially new artists. And it's important to understand the distinctions between marketing somebody who has a following and somebody who's trying to build that following.
Right.
And one of the things that I thought was most interesting was at the top of the interview when we talked about an artist's personal narrative, or the building of the brand. I call it the personal narrative because that's about the story, who that artist is, what they're about, what their values are, and how, I guess we brought about that change where, an artist in terms of who they were was always important.
Right.
But now it seems that, the brand of an artist, as I said, has always been important, but that the music today seems to be a byproduct of that.
Right.
Whereas in the past, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
It was everything.
Exactly.
And that's just a byproduct of the era that we live in, where so many more aspects, social media, blogs, websites, e-zines, memes, videos, Instagram, all of that has become part of telling that story of who that artist is.
And I thought it was interesting that he was saying that he felt like it's always existed, but that it was like a slow moving train that's always existed. So I thought that was interesting.
Yes, but a train now that has the orientation.
Right, the context.
Its context is totally different today. You're absolutely right, yeah.
I thought one of the other interesting things we covered was, is the album a concept that's no longer relevant in today's climate?
Yes.
And, and I thought that was very interesting, that, the whole idea of scarcity is a value, and, and that depending on the type of artist, because we can argue that if you're a rock band, like somebody like myself that plays in a rock band, the album still does have a purpose, but the way that it's presented now, it's much differently. You're breaking it up into, you release 4 or 5 singles prior to the actual record coming out now. So it is a bit different, but but he talked about that, for an emerging artist, that's an antiquated idea now.
It is. And I think that, when does it not become an antiquated idea? When does it become something that, like you were just speaking about, a relevant, important element to an artist's career?
Right.
Is when they have an audience.
Right.
I mean, it's the idea that, in the old days, you used to make an album because that was the economic model in which you sold. You had singles, and the more singles that were successful, the more albums you sold. It's like the more hits I heard of you,
exactly,
the more willing I was to buy your body of work.
Right.
That isn't the case anymore. And that's the reason that you talk about that inverted shift where we're talking
Correct.
marketing and essentially what it is, Eric, it's an ongoing relationship.
Right.
You don't just throw the album out and say, see you in 2 years.
Exactly.
You have 4 or 5
progressive singles that are coming out once every quarter, once every 2 or 3 months.
Exactly.
And what I really loved what he had to say was the fine line between putting out too much and what is it that you're doing in between the cycle. You're not constantly, because he thought on both sides of the coin, you can't be like a sieve where you're just turning on the faucet and there's a song coming out, every month, every week or whatever. It's impossible to do that on some kind of qualitative level. But I thought it was interesting about the fine line of what you do in between that. You can still be a presence. You can still be doing, whatever it is, behind the scenes stuff or collaborations, like he mentioned, with other people or with brands. And so I thought it was very interesting what he had to say about that. And, he said if you do have that, if you do have fans, the bottom line, what he was saying, you have a business.
Absolutely. You have a business. And the other thing that I thought was so interesting about his remarks were the new business models that can help artists, create a context around their music.
Right.
And I'm bringing that up because it goes right to the heart of what you were saying. Having an audience is a very, very big part of that.
Right.
That whole process of, creating a context around your audience, doing all those things, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Instagram, whether it's a tour, whether it's, he also mentioned, those other activities, a blog, something, and not oversaturating. And this is where we get into, the finer finessing of when is enough.
Exactly.
When is too much.
Right. It's a very fine line.
Yeah.
And he was talking about thinking about the team that, that you do have your content creators that are with you. You've got your videographer. You've got somebody that's just following you with everything that you're doing. And, that becomes the brand of the artist. And, he talked about the different ideas, with, the Chance the Rapper with the frictionless accessibility.
Right, giving the music away for free.
Correct.
Exactly.
And
yes.
being able to capitalize it on your other verticals within there, whether it's subscription or rev share deal. Various different ways that you can approach doing it nowadays, which you didn't have before.
No, you didn't have those options, or touring, or doing a streaming deal, or doing advertisements, or doing
exactly.
Any kind of partnership agreement that elevates you, your brand, your music, your image to an audience. We had talked about this before in previous episodes where it's, who you link up with,
right?
What partnerships you develop as an artist in terms of spreading what you do.
Yeah, and I thought what was really interesting out of probably the most important part that I thought that was really, it was all very valuable, but when we talked about the developments that you were seeing in the influencer marketing landscape today, and I thought that was very interesting because that is a big play that's happening now with artists, and I think, again, it's getting back to walking that tightrope. What is the correct person to align up with, and how can you convey that message that doesn't get lost, and picking the right type of influencer for your music
and who they are.
Right.
Who they are. In other words, you could have somebody who has 40 million followers or 60 million followers, but are those people who are going to be supporting your music?
Exactly.
Have you done enough research on them? What's the context? Who is their audience? One of the most earliest forms of influencer before even social media was the idea of what's known, and it's still very big, of a feature.
Right.
When an artist is featured on someone's record.
Right.
And usually it's a bigger artist.
Correct.
That's being featured on a debut or an up-and-coming artist. And the reason for that is that you're looking to
establish that artist quickly and build a foundation
on the base of that artist's audience.
Correct.
So the bigger artist will then put this out there, and that volume of people will then say, who's this XYZ?
Right.
Who's this new up and... So when they come with their own thing, there'll be an awareness. And that's still very much a I guess, what we would call a, not primitive, but a early form of influencer marketing when we didn't have social media.
Exactly.
And now we have so many more elements, whether it's through brands or through influencer marketing, where that point becomes really, really relevant.
Hey Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at mubutv.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor, show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum, theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.